For Ethan Vance, the dream of owning a place he could truly call his own felt like a distant galaxy. Living near the bustling East Coast, the affordable housing crisis wasn't just a headline, it was a suffocating reality. Rent seemed to climb every year, swallowing most of his income, leaving little room for savings, let alone a down payment on a traditional house. The idea of being tied to endless rent increases for the rest of his life felt less like living and more like just surviving. Ethan wasn't burdened by a lot of possessions. He embraced a minimalist living philosophy long before it became a trend. He valued experiences, freedom, and simplicity over accumulating things. This lifestyle made him naturally curious when he first stumbled upon the concept of tiny homes. It wasn't for everyone. The thought of living in a space barely larger than a few parked cars could feel claustrophobic to some. But for Ethan, it clicked. It represented independence, a lower environmental footprint, and most importantly, a path to owning property without drowning in a massive mortgage. It was budget living, elevated to an art form. He started his online real estate search, spending countless evenings scrolling through listings that mostly confirmed his fears about the market. Then, buried deep in search results, something different appeared. A listing for a foreclosed property that wasn't a dilapidated mansion or a crumbling fixer-upper. It was a tiny house. The price seemed impossibly low, almost too good to be true. It felt less like a simple listing and more like the discovery of a secret. Could this really be a path to his dream home, albeit a very small one? The photos showed a charming, albeit slightly neglected structure on a small patch of land in a neighborhood called Harmony Creek. It looked quiet, established a place where people knew their neighbors. The idea of making this unique little structure his own, of having a space that was entirely his, fueled a growing excitement. It felt like a genuine property investment opportunity that aligned perfectly with his values. Armed with the listing details, Ethan drove out to Harmony Creek on a crisp Saturday morning. The neighborhood was a mix of older, well-maintained homes, with manicured lawns occasionally interspersed with one or two other smaller structures, tucked away on micro-parcels. Some looked like guest houses, others maybe studios. He found the address easily. There it was. The tiny house from the photos, standing there looking at it in person, it felt more real, more attainable. The neighborhood felt peaceful, settled. Despite the tiny house's obvious need for some care, Ethan saw beyond the peeling paint and overgrown weeds. He saw potential. He saw freedom. He saw the possibility of a new beginning rooted in simplicity and ownership. The unique appeal of this unique home solidified his decision. He was ready to make an offer and step onto the path of becoming a homeowner. Sunlight filtered through the old oak trees lining the street in Harmony Creek as Ethan Vance pulled his small truck up to the curb. In the back, a modest collection of boxes held the sum total of his worldly possessions: clothes, books, a laptop, a few essentials. This was it, move-in day. The excitement from finding the tiny house, the thrill of actually owning something, bubbled up inside him. It felt like the first real step towards the independent, simple life he craved. This wasn't just buying property, it was claiming his future. He grabbed the single key the real estate agent had given him, a generic-looking silver house key. Approaching the front door, however, his first hint of trouble appeared, instead of the standard doorknob lock. Visible in the listing photos, a heavy gray metal padlock was clamped through the latch. It looked sturdy, industrial, and completely wrong. Ethan stopped, a frown creasing his brow. He tried the key the agent had given him in the doorknob, which seemed functional but was overridden by the padlock. He tried the key near the padlock, even though it clearly wasn't the right type. Nothing fit. Nothing worked. A prickle of unease started to spread through his initial optimism. He pulled out his phone, calling the real estate agent who handled the foreclosure sale. It went straight to voicemail. He tried the main office number, navigating an automated menu, until he finally reached a human. He explained the situation. He had the deed. The key he was given didn't match the lock, and there was a padlock. The person on the other end sounded confused, shuffling papers. The listing said it was empty after foreclosure, sir. Our inspector confirmed it was cleared out. There shouldn't be a padlock. Are you sure you're at the right address? Ethan confirmed the address, the listing photos in his email matching the structure in front of him. The agent promised to look into it and call him back. Offering no immediate solution or access, frustrated but determined, Ethan wasn't about to just leave. He had bought this house. He eyed the padlock again. It wasn't connected to anything structural. It was just securing the standard door latch. A quick trip to the local hardware store resulted in a small but effective pair of bolt cutters. Returning to the house, he felt a pang of guilt as he positioned the cutters, but reminded himself this was his property. With a sharp snap, the padlock broke and fell to the small porch with a clatter. He pushed open the door, ready to finally step inside his tiny home. What he saw stopped him cold. The house wasn't just not empty. It was crammed floor to ceiling, wall to wall, with other people's stuff. Boxes were stacked precariously high, covered furniture loomed under dust sheets. Lamps, miscellaneous bags, and what looked like old holiday decorations were shoved into every available corner. There was barely room to step inside. It wasn't just clutter. It looked like the entire contents of a small storage unit had been emptied here. The air was stale, smelling faintly of cardboard and disuse. This was a far cry from the empty shell he'd expected, the blank canvas for his minimalist living dreams. This was a nightmare of unexpected obstacles. Disbelief washed over him, quickly followed by a wave of confusion and mounting anxiety. He stood just inside the doorway, surrounded by strangers' belongings, his own few boxes sitting forlornly in the truck outside. How could this happen? The real estate company said it was empty. The foreclosure process was supposed to clear out previous occupants and their property. This was completely wrong. He pulled out his phone again, calling the real estate company hotline. His voice tighter this time, he explained the situation again more urgently. The response was equally unhelpful. "Sir, the property was sold as is following foreclosure. Our records show it was vacant. Any items left behind are the responsibility of the buyer." Responsibility of the buyer. To deal with someone else's entire life packed into his new home. It felt like a cruel joke, a massive real estate problem dumped squarely in his lap. They offered no contacts for the previous owners, no suggestion on how to proceed, just bureaucratic deflection. Standing there surrounded by the physical manifestation of this huge, confusing problem, Ethan felt a complete loss of control. He couldn't move in. He couldn't start the renovations he'd planned. He couldn't even easily get rid of the items. They weren't his, and simply tossing them felt wrong, maybe even illegal. He was trapped in a bizarre property dispute before he had even spent one night in his own house. The initial excitement had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy weight of helplessness. He had the deed. He had the key. The wrong one, but he didn't have access to his space. It was a complete standstill. Ethan stood in the doorway of the tiny house. The smell of aged cardboard and dust thick in the air, the sight of stacked boxes blurring in his vision. His mind raced, trying to grasp the sheer impossibility of the situation. How could a place he legally owned, cleared through foreclosure, be filled like this? He was so absorbed in the shock of it all, the feeling of being utterly stuck, that he didn't immediately notice the figure approaching from the house next door. "Well, hello there," a sharp voice cut through the quiet afternoon. Ethan turned. A woman stood on the edge of what he now realized was Agnes Thorne's meticulously manicured lawn. She was stout with tightly permed gray hair and eyes that seemed to narrow immediately as they took him in. She wore a bright, perhaps overly cheerful floral dress that seemed at odds with her stern expression. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice even despite the turmoil inside him. Agnes took a few deliberate steps closer, stopping just short of the tiny house's small yard. Her gaze swept from Ethan to the open door, revealing the cluttered interior, then back to him, her expression hardening. "I think you're the one who needs help. What in the world do you think you're doing, rummaging through my storage shed?" Ethan blinked. "Your storage shed? I bought this property. This is my house." Agnes let out a short, sharp laugh that held zero humor. "Your house? Don't be ridiculous. That little structure has been our storage shed for years. Belongs right here." She gestured emphatically towards her own large, immaculate home. "Part of our property line. No, I have the deed right here." Ethan fumbled in his pocket for the folded document. "I purchased this property last week. It went through foreclosure." Agnes waved a dismissive hand. "Foreclosure, schmore-closure, doesn't matter what papers you've got. That shed belongs to me. Always has. The folks who lived there before," she sniffed, "they let us use it. It's an arrangement, a neighborly agreement." Ethan felt a surge of frustration mixed with disbelief. "A neighborly agreement doesn't override a legal sale. I have the official deed. I own this." He unfolded the document, trying to hold it out for her to see. Agnes didn't even glance at it. Her eyes were fixed on the open door and the stacked boxes inside. "You've been breaking in, rummaging through my things. I knew something was up when I saw that padlock was gone. You cut it, didn't you? Trying to steal from me?" Her voice was rising, laced with indignation. Steal? No, I cut your padlock because I own this property and the key they gave me didn't work with it, Ethan insisted, trying to explain the situation calmly. The real estate company said it was empty. I expected it to be empty. Empty? Of course it's not empty. My things are in there. Agnes stepped forward, her face flushing. Who do you think you are coming onto my property, breaking into my shed and lying about owning it? Are you some kind of con artist, a real estate scammer? The accusation stung. I am not. I'm Ethan Vance, and I am the legal owner of this property. I have proof. He held up the deed again, trying to push through her wall of aggression. Agnes folded her arms across her chest, her expression one of stubborn, absolute conviction. I don't care what fraudulent papers you've cooked up. That sheet has been our storage for 15 years. It's not for sale. It was never for sale. You are trespassing, and you are trying to steal my belongings. Her refusal to even look at the deed, her immediate jump to accusations of theft and fraud was staggering. Ethan felt his own temper beginning to fray. Look, there's clearly been a mistake here, but the mistake isn't mine. I followed every legal step to purchase this. Your arrangement with the previous owners is between you and them. It has nothing to do with me or my ownership now. A mistake. The only mistake is you thinking you can waltz in here and claim what's mine? Agnes was practically shouting now, her voice carried across the quiet street. A curtain twitched in the window of the house across the road. She didn't seem to care, or perhaps she wanted an audience. Get out! Get out of my shed! Get off my property! I'm calling the police! Go ahead, Ethan retorted, the politeness draining out of his voice. They can verify that I own this place. Oh, they will, Agnes sneered, pulling out her phone with trembling hands. And they'll haul you away for trespassing and attempted burglary. You picked the wrong house, mister. Ethan watched her dial, feeling a mix of dread and righteous anger. This was quickly spiraling into a full-blown neighbor dispute, one he had walked right into without any warning. His attempt at a peaceful minimalist life had just collided head-on with a wall of unexpected entitlement and aggression. He stood his ground, determined not to be intimidated, but the sight of Agnes Thorne, red-faced and venomous, made it clear that welcoming committee was definitely not in the cards for Harmony Creek. This property conflict was just beginning. Within minutes, the distant wail of a siren grew louder, finally culminating in the arrival of a patrol car pulling up to the curb. Two officers, Officer Ramirez and Officer Chen, stepped out, their expressions neutral but alert. Agnes Thorne immediately rushed towards them, her voice high-pitched and frantic, painting a vivid, albeit wildly inaccurate picture of a suspicious intruder attempting to break into her storage shed. Ethan remained by the tiny house's doorway, holding his deed, trying to project calm authority, despite the knot in his stomach. This wasn't how his move-in day was supposed to go. Officer Ramirez, a woman with a calm demeanor, approached Ethan first, while Officer Chen listened to Agnes's animated account. Sir, can you tell us what's going on? Yes, officer. Ethan began, trying to be clear and concise. My name is Ethan Vance. I am the legal owner of this property. I purchased this tiny house through a foreclosure sale last week. I have the deed right here. He handed her the document. I arrived today to move in, but I found the door padlocked, with a lock. I didn't have a key for. I removed it and found the house is full of this woman's belongings. She claims it's her storage shed, but it's a separate property and I own it. Officer Ramirez examined the deed, flipping through the pages. It looked legitimate, official. Okay, Mr. Vance. And you say this is a separate property, not part of her lot? Yes, it was listed and sold separately, Ethan confirmed. Meanwhile, Agnes, having finished her initial complaint to Officer Chen, bustled over. See, he admits he broke the lock, and look at this address. She pointed to her own house number visible on her porch. I live right there. This shed has always been used by us. For years, he's lying about buying it. He's a trespasser. She then produced a utility bill or some piece of mail clearly showing her name and address next door, attempting to use it as proof of ownership over Ethan's property. Officer Chen, a younger officer, stepped forward. Ma'am, he has a deed. That's typically proof of ownership. Fake papers, Agnes shrieked. He probably printed them offline. This is my property. These are my things in there. She gestured wildly towards the cluttered interior of the tiny house. Possession is 9/10 of the law, isn't it? My things are in there. He has nothing. This was the tricky part. While Ethan had the legal deed, Agnes had physical possession of the contents and a long-standing claim of usage backed by her established residency. Right next door, the foreclosure and sale were recent, meaning the town's official tax maps and property records might not have fully updated in the public-facing system. The officers could immediately access in their patrol car or by calling dispatch. This created a gray area, a momentary lack of irrefutable, instantly verifiable proof of the precise property line and current ownership in the field. Officer Ramirez held up a hand, trying to calm things down. All right, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mr. Vance. We see you have a deed, ma'am. You claim this is your storage and you live next door. She turned back to Ethan, her expression sympathetic but firm. The town property records can sometimes take a little while to fully update after a sale, especially a foreclosure. Right now, based on what we can immediately verify, there's a dispute about the property line and ownership, and she's making a complaint of trespassing. Officer Chen added, technically, until the town records are definitively updated and show the clear separation, and given that her belongings are inside and she's been using it, it creates a complicated situation on the ground. But I own it. Ethan repeated, his voice rising in frustration. The deed is legal proof. We understand that, sir, Officer Ramirez said gently. But to prevent further disturbance and potential charges tonight, and while this gets sorted out officially with the town's records, we need you to step away from the property for now. If you remain here, given her complaint, we may have to take action. You want me to leave my own house? Ethan asked, dumbfounded. This felt completely backward. He had followed the rules, gone through the legal channels, and he was being told to back down from his own property. Just for tonight, Mr. Vance, Officer Ramirez clarified. It's about de-escalation and allowing the official process to catch up. Go to the town hall first thing Monday. Get them to update the records. Make sure your deed is fully filed and reflected in their system. Once that's unequivocally clear, we can revisit this if needed. But for tonight, to avoid a potential arrest based on her complaint, it's best if you find somewhere else to stay. Agnes stood nearby, a smug, triumphant look starting to spread across her face. Ethan felt a wave of bitter disappointment wash over him. He looked at his truck packed with his few belongings, the tiny house that was legally his but felt miles away, and then at Agnes radiating self-satisfaction. He was being sidelined by bureaucracy and the sheer audacity of his neighbor's claims. It was a frustrating, infuriating taste of legal hurdles and how quickly a clear situation could be complicated by a forceful personality and a slow-moving system. He swallowed his protest, arguing further with the officers who seemed genuinely caught in a procedural bind wouldn't help. He nodded reluctantly. All right, he said, the word heavy with defeat. I'll go, but I'll be at town hall first thing Monday. That's the best approach, Officer Chen said. As Ethan walked back to his truck, leaving his dream home and the infuriating Agnes Thorne behind, he felt the sting of this temporary defeat. He was displaced from his own property, forced into finding a motel, all because a neighbor decided his legal ownership was less important than her long-standing informal use. This wasn't just a simple property dispute anymore. It was a battle against entitlement and the frustrating inefficiency of the system. But sitting in his truck driving away from Harmony Creek, a cold anger began to solidify into a hard resolve. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. This unexpected obstacle had just become a challenge he was determined to overcome. The sterile air of the motel room felt like a cage compared to the open sky of Harmony Creek. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the afternoon replaying in his mind. Agnes's venomous face, the feeling of his legal deed being momentarily dismissed, the quiet authority of the officers telling him to leave his property. It all churned into a bitter mix of frustration and humiliation. He had come seeking a simple life, a fresh start, and instead had landed squarely in the middle of a baffling and unjust property dispute. For a while, defeat was a heavy blanket. He slumped back, staring blankly at the ceiling. How could this be happening? He'd followed the rules, signed the papers, spent his hard-earned money, and yet one aggressive neighbor and a bureaucratic delay had left him homeless, effectively barred from the property he owned. It felt fundamentally wrong, a classic example of the little guy getting trampled by someone with more audacity and a louder voice. This wasn't just an unexpected obstacle, it felt like an attack, but the feeling of helplessness began to chafe. The image of Agnes's smug face as he drove away ignited a spark of defiance. He wasn't going to let her win. He wasn't going to be pushed around. He had the law on his side, even if the system was slow to acknowledge it on the street. He had to fight back. But how? Simply waiting for the town records to update felt too passive, too vulnerable to whatever Agnes might try next. He needed to take control. Sitting up, Ethan grabbed his laptop. If Agnes wanted to play dirty, maybe it was time to see what dirt could be found on her. He started digging. He searched for Agnes Thorne in Harmony Creek, looking for public records, local news mentions anything. Then he focused his search on her property address next door to the tiny house. He pulled up online property assessment maps, cross-referencing them with the tiny house's parcel details, confirming again visually that they were indeed separate lots despite her claims. Next, he delved into the town of Harmony Creek's official website. He found sections on zoning regulations, building codes, and property maintenance ordinances. He started reading dry as the language was looking for anything that applied to property owners. It was tedious work, scrolling through dense legal text, but the memory of Agnes's aggression fueled his concentration. This wasn't just research. It felt like gathering ammunition for a legal battle, and then he found it. An ordinance detailing requirements for maintaining property, appearances, safety standards, and structural integrity. With Agnes's address pulled up on another screen via satellite view and street view, thank goodness for public online maps, he started comparing the rules to the reality next door. The ordinance mentioned required safety railings on steps. Agnes's front steps looked rickety. It detailed standards for fences. Agnes's back fence was clearly leaning and missing slats. It discussed functional garage doors and outdoor lighting. Wait a minute. He zoomed in on Agnes's property in the online map view. The large detached garage behind her house. It didn't seem to have a door at all, just an open frame. And several sections of outdoor lighting appeared, broken or missing. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline, violation after violation. It wasn't just one small thing. It was a pattern of neglect that seemed to fly in the face of the town's rules. These weren't minor aesthetic quibbles. Some seemed like genuine safety issues that the town ordinances explicitly addressed. He meticulously documented every single one, taking screenshots, noting ordinance numbers, building a detailed list that was the polar opposite of Agnes's vague, baseless accusations. This was concrete, verifiable information. This gave him leverage. His focus shifted from simply defending his ownership to strategically using Agnes's own rule-breaking against her. He felt the scales starting to balance the passive victim, giving way to a strategic combatant. Just as he was cross-referencing another ordinance, his phone buzzed, an email notification. It was from a law office. He opened it, his heart sinking for a second. Expecting more bad news, it was a formal notification. Agnes Thorne was suing him. The lawsuit claimed trespassing property damage for the padlock and disturbing the peace. It was exactly the kind of frivolous, aggressive move he now expected from her, but instead of feeling defeated again, a cold, hard resolve settled over him. A lawsuit. Fine. Agnes wanted a fight. She was going to get one, and now Ethan had his own arsenal. The notice of the lawsuit didn't break him. It simply hardened his determination. He would go to town hall, make sure his deed was ironclad in their system, and then he would face Agnes Thorne in court, armed with proof that she wasn't the picture-perfect, rule-abiding neighbor she pretended to be. This thrilling story of conflict had just entered a new strategic phase, and Ethan was ready. The days following the lawsuit notification were a blur of focused activity for Ethan. The initial sting of defeat had completely faded, replaced by a steely resolve. He wasn't just defending his property anymore. He was fighting against Agnes Thorne's sheer audacity and her attempts to use the legal system as a weapon. He would meet her challenge head-on. This was his journey of discovery into the frustrating world of neighbor disputes and legal strategy. His motel room transformed into a temporary command center. Printouts of town ordinances and building codes were spread across the desk. He meticulously organized the photographs he'd taken from online maps, cross-referencing them with the specific regulations they seemed to violate. He highlighted key phrases, sorted sticky notes with section numbers, building a clear, undeniable case, not about his property, but about hers. This wasn't busy work. It was the creation of his shield and sword. He compiled everything into a neat, professional-looking binder labeled simply, Harmony Creek Property Ordinances and Violations. His first call on Monday morning was to the Harmony Creek Town Hall. He spoke to the Property Records Department, explaining the situation with the recent foreclosure sale and the apparent delay in system updates. He provided his parcel number and a copy of his deed via email, politely but firmly, requesting that his ownership be accurately and promptly reflected in their public records. They assured him they would expedite the process, acknowledging that recent foreclosure sales sometimes caused temporary discrepancies. Getting his official ownership undeniably cemented in the town's system was the essential foundation of his counteroffensive. Next, Ethan sought legal counsel. He found a local attorney specializing in property law and civil disputes. In their initial consultation, Ethan laid out the entire convoluted story, buying the foreclosed tiny house, finding it filled with Agnes's belongings, her aggressive claims, the police intervention, and finally, her lawsuit. He then presented the binder of Agnes's property violations. The lawyer, a seasoned professional named Mr. Davies, listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When Ethan finished and slid the binder across the desk, Mr. Davies picked it up and began to flip through it. His eyebrows rose slightly as he saw the organized detail, the highlighted ordinances, the accompanying photos. "Well, Mr. Vance," Mr. Davies said, closing the binder, "your deed is solid. We'll ensure the town records are ironclad immediately. Her lawsuit, based on what you've told me, appears opportunistic, shall we say." "And the violations?" Ethan asked. "Can we use those?" Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair. "Ah, the violations? They aren't directly relevant to whether you own the tiny house. Legally speaking, your deed handles that. However," he tapped the binder, "they demonstrate a pattern of, shall we say, selective adherence to town rules on Ms. Thorne's part. In a mediation setting, which is likely where her lawsuit will head first, this could prove to be significant leverage." He explained that while he couldn't explicitly demand Agnes fix her violations as part of settling her lawsuit against Ethan, the simple knowledge that Ethan possessed this documented list and could report her to the town would give them considerable bargaining power. It suggests that if she wants to avoid potential fines, inspections, and headaches from the town, headaches she clearly hasn't wanted for years given the state of her property, she should be very reasonable in resolving her dispute with you. The strategy was clear. Use the threat of exposing Agnes's long-standing non-compliance to pressure her into dropping her baseless lawsuit, acknowledging his ownership, and removing her belongings. It felt like turning her own weaponized adherence, her demand he follow rules by staying off her property, against her. With the town records being updated and a solid legal strategy in place, Ethan felt a growing sense of anticipation. The mediation date was set. The tension was building. He reviewed his binder, the proof of Agnes's hidden mess, and felt ready. This wasn't just about getting into his house anymore. It was about proving a point and finally putting an end to Agnes Thorne's aggressive entitlement. The thrilling story was heading towards a confrontation, and Ethan was prepared for battle. The mediation room was small, sterile, and filled with an uncomfortable silence. Ethan sat beside Mr. Davies, his lawyer across a polished table from Agnes Thorne, and her own attorney, a sharp-featured woman who looked perpetually unimpressed. A neutral mediator sat at the head, guiding the process. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a stark contrast to the quiet neighborhood where this conflict had begun. This was the arena where Ethan's meticulous preparation would meet Agnes's bluster. Agnes began, her voice initially confident, recounting her version of events. She spoke of her long-standing use of the shed, the agreement with the previous owners, the shock of finding her padlock cut, and the audacity of Ethan attempting to claim her property and rummage through her belongings. She painted herself as the victim, a longtime resident terrorized by an aggressive newcomer with fraudulent intentions. Her lawyer occasionally added a legal point, framing Agnes's claims in formal terms. Ethan listened, outwardly calm, but his jaw was clenched. Hearing her distort the truth so brazenly was infuriating. When it was their turn, Mr. Davies spoke first, calmly and professionally. He presented Ethan's deed clear and legally binding. "As you can see, mediator, and as is now officially reflected in the updated town records," he emphasized the last part, glancing subtly at Agnes's lawyer, "Mr. Vance is the undisputed legal owner of the property at Tiny House address. The foreclosure process extinguished any prior informal agreements or claims of usage." He explained that Ethan's actions in accessing the property were those of an owner, not a trespasser. He addressed the lawsuit's claims directly, stating they were baseless and contradicted by the documented legal ownership. Agnes visibly bristled, her initial confidence wavering slightly as the concrete reality of Ethan's deed, now confirmed by the town, sank in. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something to her, likely confirming that the ownership aspect was no longer debatable. Now, regarding Ms. Thorne's claim about her belongings being on the property, Mr. Davies continued, his tone shifting slightly. Mr. Vance was understandably surprised to find the house occupied by storage items, as the listing and prior inspections indicated it would be vacant post-foreclosure. He is prepared to give Ms. Thorne a reasonable time frame to remove her property, of course. The mediator nodded, guiding the conversation towards finding a resolution, how Agnes would retrieve her items when, and formally acknowledging Ethan's ownership to settle the core dispute. And Agnes's lawsuit? Agnes opened her mouth, likely ready to demand an unreasonable amount of time or make excuses, but Ethan subtly caught Mr. Davies's eye. This was the moment Mr. Davies turned the binder that had been sitting on the table towards Agnes and her lawyer. Before we discuss the logistics of item removal, there's another matter Mr. Vance wanted to address, which he believes demonstrates a pattern relevant to Mrs. Thorne's conduct, and claims. He paused, letting the tension build. During the course of researching the property lines and local regulations, Mr. Vance came across the town of Harmony Creek's property maintenance ordinances and building codes. Agnes's lawyer gave a small, dismissive huff. And what does that have to do with Mr. Vance trespassing on Ms. Thorne's storage shed? Everything potentially, Mr. Davies replied smoothly. Mr. Vance noted several apparent long-standing violations of these ordinances on Ms. Thorne's adjacent property at Agnes's address. He opened the binder to the first section. For example, Ordinance 314 requiring secure walkways, free of tripping hazards. He slid over a photo of Agnes's uneven front steps. Or Ordinance 407 regarding fence maintenance and structural integrity. He showed the picture of the leaning broken fence. He continued flipping through the binder, highlighting the missing garage door. Ordinance 521, functional garage access and the faulty outdoor lighting. Ordinance 412, minimum lighting, standards. With each page, Agnes's face grew paler. Her initial dismissal turned to shock, then to a tight-lipped fury mixed with fear. Her lawyer, who had started with an air of bored confidence, was now leaning forward, scrutinizing the binder, his expression one of growing alarm. This wasn't what they had prepared for. This wasn't about a simple property line dispute or a trespassing claim anymore. This was documented evidence of Agnes's own non-compliance with town rules she had seemingly ignored for years. Mr. Davies closed the binder quietly. Mr. Vance hasn't filed a complaint with the town regarding these matters, yet the unspoken threat hung in the air. However, it suggests a certain selective adherence to the rules which seems pertinent given Ms. Thorne's aggressive pursuit of this lawsuit against Mr. Vance for alleged infractions. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Agnes's aggressive posture collapsed, replaced by a desperate tension. Her lawyer pulled the binder closer, whispering urgently to Agnes, their heads together. The conversation was rapid, hushed, and clearly pointed. The power dynamic had completely flipped. Ethan watched a quiet sense of vindication settling over him. He hadn't raised his voice or made demands. He had simply presented the facts, meticulously gathered and undeniable. Agnes Thorne, the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood order, was now exposed as a significant rule-breaker herself. The table indeed had turned. This legal battle was now firmly in Ethan's favor. The hushed conference between Agnes Thorne and her lawyer lasted several tense minutes. Ethan watched them. The weight of his binder of violations, a silent, powerful presence on the table between them. Agnes's face was a mask of warring emotions, fury at being exposed, frustration at her trapped position, and a flicker of fear at the potential consequences if Ethan decided to report her to the town. Her lawyer spoke intently, likely, outlining the significant fines and mandatory repairs she could face if the town decided to pursue the documented violations. The cost of fixing everything Ethan had found would far outweigh the relatively minor costs of the mediation and dropping her frivolous lawsuit. Finally, Agnes's lawyer turned back to the mediator, his earlier confidence entirely gone. Ms. Thorne has reconsidered her position, he stated, his voice tight. Given the documentation presented regarding Mr. Vance's clear ownership, Ms. Thorne is willing to withdraw her lawsuit. A quiet sense of victory began to unfold within Ethan, but he remained outwardly calm. This was only the first step. Excellent, the mediator said, facilitating the agreement. And the matter of the belongings on the property. Agnes's lawyer exchanged another look with his client, who nodded curtly, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. Ms. Thorne agrees to remove all of her belongings from the property at Tiny House address within, say, 2 weeks. Mr. Davies, Ethan's lawyer, smoothly countered, given that Mr. Vance has been displaced from his home since purchasing it, and the significant inconvenience this has caused, a more immediate time frame is necessary. We propose 72 hours. A gasp escaped Agnes. That's impossible. It's storage, Ms. Thorne, not a full household, Mr. Davies said politely, but firmly. Mr. Vance needs access to his home. 72 hours is reasonable. Another hurried whisper session ensued. Agnes threw a venomous look at Ethan, but his expression remained steady. He wasn't being unreasonable. He was simply demanding what was fair. Access to the property he owned, unhindered by her unauthorized storage. Reluctantly, Agnes's lawyer conceded. All right, 72 hours. The mediator recorded the agreement. So, to confirm, Ms. Thorne withdraws her lawsuit against Mr. Vance. Ms. Thorne will remove all of her belongings from the property at Tiny House address within 72 hours from the conclusion of this mediation. Are there any other matters to be resolved? Mr. Davies added one final point. Given that Mr. Vance was forced into this mediation solely by Ms. Thorne's unfounded lawsuit and refusal to acknowledge his clear ownership, we request that Ms. Thorne cover Mr. Vance's legal fees for this mediation session. Agnes looked as though she might explode her face, turning a deeper shade of red. Her lawyer sighed, a clear sign of capitulation. Agreed, he said. Before Agnes could object, the documented violations had created an undeniable leverage point, forcing her to accept terms she clearly despised to avoid a larger, more costly problem. The mediator finalized the written agreement, which all parties signed. The session was over. Agnes Thorne had been legally compelled to stand down. She gathered her things with jerky, angry movements, avoiding eye contact with Ethan. As they stood to leave, she shot one last seething look in his direction, a look filled with resentment and the promise of continued animosity. Even in defeat, leaving the mediation room, Ethan felt a wave of profound relief wash over him. It wasn't just about the victory, it was about the validation. He had faced aggression and bureaucracy, head-on, used his wits and meticulousness, and emerged successful. He hadn't resorted to shouting or threats. He had simply used the system and the truth to his advantage. Agnes Thorne's entitlement had finally met its match in cold, hard evidence. He stepped out into the afternoon sun, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling deep within him. His legal battle was won, and his tiny home awaited. A week later, under a clear blue sky, Ethan Vance parked his truck in front of the tiny house in Harmony Creek. The air felt different this time, lighter, free of the heavy tension that had clung to it during his previous visits. He walked towards the front door, his steps purposeful. The heavy gray padlock was still there, a stubborn symbol of the conflict he had just navigated, but this time, it didn't represent an insurmountable obstacle. It was the last remaining physical barrier to the space that was legally and rightfully his. He reached into his truck bed and pulled out a small, familiar pair of bolt cutters. This time there was no hesitation, no pang of guilt. This was a deliberate, necessary act. He positioned the cutters on the padlock, the metal jaws biting down. With a firm squeeze, the lock snapped open and clattered onto the small porch, joining the ghost of the first one he'd cut. This simple act felt immensely symbolic, a final severing of Agnes Thorne's unwarranted claim on his property. The legal battle was over. This was the physical reclaiming. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed the door open. The house was empty, truly wonderfully, blessedly empty. The stacks of boxes, the shrouded furniture, the clutter that had filled every corner, it was all gone. Agnes had complied. A few stray items remained. A forgotten dust sheet in the corner, a small empty cardboard box, remnants of her hasty departure. Ethan stepped inside, allowing the door to swing shut behind him. He stood in the middle of the small, vacant room, taking it all in. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was just an empty shell, but to Ethan it was beautiful. It was quiet. It was his. This empty space, this blank canvas, was the physical manifestation of his dream home and the independence he had fought for. He walked slowly around the perimeter of the tiny living area, touching the walls, running his hand over the windowsill. He peered into the small space that would become his kitchen, and the even smaller area for the bathroom. It was exactly as he had envisioned it when he first saw the listing. Compact, efficient, perfect for a minimalist lifestyle. The stress of the past weeks began to melt away, replaced by a quiet sense of peace and accomplishment. He caught a glimpse of movement from the house next door. Turning, he saw Agnes Thorne standing by her window, the curtain pulled slightly back. She was watching him. Her face was impassive, but her posture radiated a stiff, resentful stillness. She didn't wave, didn't approach. She simply observed a defeated queen watching a newcomer occupy a piece of territory she believed was hers. Ethan met her gaze for a moment, a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Not triumphant, but simply acknowledging that he saw her and he was here to stay. He didn't need to gloat. His presence in the empty house was victory enough. Turning back into his tiny home, Ethan let out a long sigh, a release of pent-up tension. The messy chapter of the conflict was closed. Now the actual work of making this space his own could begin. He went back out to his truck and started unloading his few boxes, carrying them into the quiet waiting house. He spent the rest of the afternoon simply cleaning, sweeping away the dust and the last traces of Agnes's unwanted presence. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across Harmony Creek, Ethan stepped outside. He had brought a small potted geranium with him. It felt important to add something living, something beautiful to this newly claimed space. He found a spot near the entrance and began to dig a small hole. As he gently placed the plant in the earth, he looked up at the tiny house, then glanced almost instinctively towards Agnes's window. She was no longer there. The street was quiet. Ethan smiled softly. His journey of discovery fraught with unexpected conflict had brought him here, to this small patch of land, this tiny structure now, finally, his own. The challenges had been real, the frustration immense, but standing there, planting a flower, he knew it had been worth it. The tiny house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of resilience, independence, and the hard-won peace of finally being home. This thrilling story of conflict had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet dignity of reclaiming one's space. Life often throws unexpected obstacles your way, sometimes from surprising directions, like a seemingly simple property purchase turning into a battle. Ethan's journey shows us that when faced with unreasonable opposition or bureaucratic hurdles, feeling overwhelmed is natural, but letting it defeat you is optional. A key lesson here is the power of proactive problem solving. Instead of just waiting, Ethan used his frustration as fuel for research, meticulously uncovering the facts about his adversary. This highlights that thorough preparation and undeniable documentation are potent weapons. When dealing with conflicts, especially those involving rules or systems, arming yourself with concrete evidence can shift the power dynamic entirely, turning a seemingly lost cause into a strategic advantage. Don't be intimidated into backing down from what is rightfully yours. Standing your ground, supported by truth and preparation, is crucial for personal integrity and achieving your goals. View challenges as opportunities to become more resourceful and resilient. By combining persistence with smart strategy, you can navigate complex situations and ultimately secure your peace, just as Ethan finally secured his home.